Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Dividock. I'm the supervisor for the Planning, Zoning, and Land Use Unit in Oakland County. Welcome to today's planners gathering, short-term rentals. Just a few reminders, the meeting's being recorded and will be made available on our website. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function in Zoom and direct your questions to Jim Schaefer. Jim will moderate a question and answer session after the presentations have completed. So let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Kyle Bryce, Senior Planner for City of Ferndale, and Jeff Polkowski, Director of Development Services for Waterford Township. Thank you both for joining us. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Cool. Can everybody hear me? Good. Okay. So thank you for coming. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the intro, Ryan. So again, my name is Kyle. I've been with the City of Ferndale for nearly 3 years. I oversee our short-term rentals program. I think I want to make a quick note that, Oakland County is a big place, and I think all our cities are a little bit different. So Jeff and I were talking before the meeting. It seems like our Airbnbs are used a little bit differently. So hopefully between the two of us, you get some great info on them and how we're using them. So just a quick info background on Ferndale. If you're not familiar, we are about 19,000 people, a little under 4 square miles. We have nearly 11,000 housing units. Unsurprisingly, about 80% of that is single family detached. We do have a variety of duplexes and units, multifamily units. Just a small portion of our city has over 50 unit buildings. Throughout the entire city, it is about 1/3 rental units. So it's quite a bit. So there's obviously a pretty big market for short-term rentals here in the city. We're centered at 9 and Woodward, and we're pretty close to 75. So I think a lot of people are using short-term rentals here in Ferndale as a way to stay for events, avoid hotels downtown. So we've got people come for big events, either the Dream Cruise or for the draft, things like that. So it does seem to be more of like an alternative to a hotel as opposed to some kind of vacation getaway. So, in terms of our city character, we're in older streetcar suburbs, so it's a very dense grid. So you can see we have a lot of pretty clear blocks, a lot of straight lines, things like that. We have a lot of small lots throughout the city. I would say the average is probably around like a 40-foot wide lot. Some neighborhoods and streets of the city go even less than that, somewhere as low as 30. So it's pretty dense, pretty tight, but it also is very walkable, which I think is part of the attraction for the STRs. So short-term rentals, I know Jeff has some great definitions of, what they are. But in terms of how we view them, it's just any kind of short-term rental unit. They've been existing in some way, shape, or form for, a long time. But I think this parlance that we all use today, short-term rentals, kind of came into being with Airbnbs and Vrvos and things like that. So these had started to pop up probably in the late 2010s. The city became aware of it, and we wanted to figure out how we wanted to regulate them. So the city held a few focus group meetings with the community just to get a sense of what the community's hopes and fears and concerns were. So some of these concerns are probably not at all surprising to anyone here. Loud parties, bringing in a bunch of people from either in the city or outside the city and making a lot of noise. Poor sanitation, leaving trash out, not cleaning up. Parking issues is a major issue in our community in general. So there were concerns about people just taking up all the spots on the street, perhaps blocking driveways, and then noise in general. So we estimate that around 70 were operating in early 2021, which is around the time that we started to really explore what we wanted to do and how we wanted to enforce it. So the city drafted an ordinance and it was adopted in March of 2021. It's pretty robust. It's available online, so feel free to check it out. It includes specific definitions for short-term rentals and everything related to them, when a license is necessary, It outlines application requirements. It outlines a number of general requirements that they have to abide by. And then it also includes these final two, which are very important, are density limitations and enforcement. So I'll just run through the ordinance a little bit. So we outline residential and non-residential short-term rentals. So the first one is the case where the owner actually lives in the house and they are renting out a room. Frankly, that's pretty rare and unusual, so we hardly get many of those. So the vast majority of our program is non-residential short-term rentals. So that's a case where somebody owns a house or a duplex and they are renting out one of those units on a short-term basis, which for us is a maximum of 30 days. Licenses are always necessary. So we have a certificate process. We have a rental program for all rentals in the city, whether they're short-term or not. So it's a pretty similar process. Everybody is lumped into our rental program, and I'll go into what's included in that. We have an application, which details a lot of information about the applicant. It includes, things like their driver's license number for any compliance issues that could arise. For those rare people who actually are living in the house and renting out their room, we do require them to provide their principal residence exemption affidavit to prove that they are in fact living there. In terms of general requirements, we have some pretty, I would say, standard stuff about waste, noise, and parking. You can't be a bother, really. Any of those issues, if they do become a problem, people call us. Sometimes they can call the police while the event is happening because it's more often than not, outside of City Hall working hours. But there are enforcement issues that are coming up in this slide. A major takeaway here is we do set an occupancy of 8 people. Obviously, this can be a little difficult to enforce in the moment, but it is set into our slide, so it can be used for enforcement. Density limitations are, I think, one of the most unique things that we have here. So I have a few slides dedicated to that. And in terms of enforcement, we have it set in stone that if there are 3 substantiated violations, we have a review process that can end with the revocation of the STR license by the city manager. Frankly, that has not happened yet. Most people have been able to, corral in their tenants or vet their tenants better or be a little more strict up front. So it seems most of our problems have subsided before they've had to go to this point. We also have a process for, a civil infraction. So there's a series of tickets that do escalate. That would be used more in a case of if someone is operating one illegally. This is a screenshot of our application. So it's pretty typical city stuff, I would say. From the point of view of an applicant, if they have a property that they are hoping to use for a short-term rental, or maybe they are looking at a property to purchase to use for that, I hope and pray that they call me first before they, make a big financial commitment to anything. So they would call us, describe what they want to do, and then it's up to me to review our density cap. I'll go into that in a little more detail later, but if the block is not capped, if they're allowed to have a short-term rental there, we would process the application. There's a $250 annual fee. They schedule inspections, and then assuming they complete all their inspections and they get re-inspected and everything is all set, they would receive their certificate, which lasts for 1 year. So our density limitations, this is a pretty important part of our process. So the exact text is non-residential short-term rental units shall be limited to no more than 5% of the total number of single-family duplex multifamily units on a block in residential zone districts in the city. So we track this through BSNA software, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and also our ArcGIS. So that 5% of the block, that's really the killer here. So every block can have one. And then if you do the math with 5%, you need to have at least 40 units on the block to allow for 2. So there are a few areas in the city where we actually have two on a given block. And then there are areas where we have enough units that there could be more. So to be clear, short-term rentals, although the vast majority I would say are in single family and also duplexes, they can be in multifamily. So we don't have any restrictions about, what it looks like or the exact use of the structure. For us, it's just a pure unit count on a block by block basis. Um, Probably the most difficult situation is when someone buys a property and they say, I want to use this for a short-term rental, and then they come to me and their block is capped and they cannot open. So the block already has that 5% total. So they're kind of in a tough position. So that happens occasionally, more often than I think anyone would like. So their only options at that time really are to wait for someone else on their block to cease their short-term rental operation, and then it uncaps, or they can do our regular rental program, which is at least 31 days. So, I mean, thankfully, that's kind of been an attractive option for people who are in this tough spot. Like traveling nursing, I think is probably the most common short-ish, long-ish term kind of use. So we've seen people pivot to that. They go through our general rental process, so they can do like an annual rental term with their tenants, or they can just do at least 31 days. So it's a way to help people out. So that's been a pretty nice provision to have. This is a map of the city. It might be a little hard to see on your screen just because most of our parcels are so teeny tiny. But if you maybe squint, perhaps you'll be able to see there are some colored dots. So those are actually our short-term rentals. This map is as of July of this year. The green ones are certified and the yellow are on hold, which means they're typically going through the inspection process. So we're clustered on 9 and Woodward, but you can see that this is really peppered throughout the city. Maybe it's a little more dense as you get closer to downtown, but it is pretty widespread, which I think is the point of our density ordinance. It's really controlling it. It's not like a few of these blocks downtown are seeing tons and tons of short-term rentals pop up and they're all concentrated there. It truly has been spread out throughout the city. This is a few screenshots that are closer up of that same map. So on the left, you can see a neighborhood in what I would say is kind of a typical pattern. So you can see how they're spread out. These blocks are small enough that they can only have one. So you can see each block has one. I should note that what we call a block is bound by 4 streets. So it is the row of houses on one street and then the row of houses that back up against them. So it's whatever those 4 outer streets that contain a block, that is what we call a block. In the top right, you can see that's a short-term rental on the northern half of the block. On the southern half is a pretty large apartment building. So in theory, more short-term rentals could either go into the apartment building or they could be added to that north side of the block. Based on how we define blocks in the bottom right, they can be across the street from each other, and they can even be right next to each other. I know we have at least one that is right next to each other. In terms of inspections, they're all the same as our just general rental inspections. So whatever people have to do to get their, typical rental property of a 1-year lease, whatever they're doing, the short-term rental is on the same hook. Our biggest common issues are smoke and CO detectors, broken and damaged driveways or steps that lead up to the house. We do require a furnace report to show that it's working, effectively and safely. And typically we have some, issues with ingress or egress and windows and things like that. An important thing to note here is that our short-term rentals, this entire process of the application, the fee, and the inspections must be resubmitted annually. So we do have some provisions in place to send out notices a few months in advance to get people ready for that. It is different than our non-short-term rentals, which is citywide. Those are biannual. In terms of the current status, so as of Monday, we have 67 certified throughout the city, so they're active in good standing. We have 41 on hold. I would say most of those are people who are most of them are probably people who are getting reviewed. They've already been open, and then they're going through the re-inspection process. And then a handful of those are people who are doing this for the first time. Maybe they haven't had their inspection yet, or maybe they are going through the process. They had a few issues with their inspection, and they are fixing them and then waiting to get re-inspected. We've had 327 total applications since August in 21. To close out, I just have a few slides dedicated to some common issues that we've run into and, some potential, I guess, solutions or ways to look at them. I talked about the density cap issue. That's kind of the most, unfortunate one to run into. It's no different than when, as planners, we see people who lease properties that are not zoned for what they want to do. It's an unfortunate thing. But that long-term rental for at least 31 days, that's kind of been a helpful godsend for some people, I would say. All of our certificate information is online at BSA Online. So people are able to check and see if there's a guy on their block that has the spot that they want, it's got the STR and they can't open, they can go online and they can see when their property certificate expires for that. I mean, chances are people will renew, but people do drop out for a variety of reasons. It's really not that unusual to get a report that someone's ceased their STR. In terms of inspections, sometimes they're just too costly to do, or it's too much for them. I mean, these are building code issues, frankly, so they're non-negotiable. We've been pretty nice with trying to grant extensions and work with people as best as we can, but we're simply just not going to sign off on a property that is not safe. Time delays, this is a pretty big one. So we've seen a lot of people who are aware of the cap. It seems, people know about this. They know there's a density limit. They don't want to lose their spot. So they'll say, yeah, sure. And they pay, they get their application. Maybe they get inspected, they fail a bunch of stuff. And then they really, really drag their feet. I mean, some of these people have dragged their feet for months and months and months. Recently, we revised our process timeline. So there's a 60-day period where once you apply, you have to get your stuff done and you have to get certified. So that's been helpful in kind of pushing people along. There's been some fights and some, issues about it, but overall, I would say it's working pretty well. The other issues we get are unlicensed STRs. Frankly, I don't really have the time or the bandwidth to police Airbnb. And especially if you've ever tried to look, they don't give you the address and it's not clear. And even when you do the map view on Airbnb, it's not telling you exactly where the property is. So it's not very helpful from a municipal standpoint to, cruise through Airbnb to try to find these properties. Sometimes in their photos, they will give you a photo of the house, which is very helpful. And then if you know the rough area, you can find it either yourself or on Google Street View. And a lot of times we also get reports of people who say, hey, this is clearly an Airbnb. People are having parties, they're in and out. And then we do our review on our end and we find that it's not licensed. At that point, we have our resources where we can contact the property owner and we, politely but firmly remind them that this is not permitted and they either have to cease or go through the process. This could be compounded, of course, if they're operating on a capped block. So we'd be in a situation of telling them that they have to cease, and by the way, they can't do it at all, no matter what. The other one is licensed short-term rentals with problems. So these are related to those issues that we discussed at the beginning of my presentation. It's usually almost always noise and parking. And again, we contact the property owner, whoever's operating the Airbnb, and we remind them of our enforcement policy. There's a little bit of a threat that they could lose their spot if they do not clean up the act. They do have the power to, enforce rules over the tenants, so we do expect them to follow those guidelines. Otherwise, they can and will lose their spot. Just going forward, we reviewed it earlier this year. So I took over the program at the beginning of the year, and we did a review of everything that's going on. We considered raising that density cap. So again, it's at 5% of a block. We thought about raising it to perhaps 10%, and City Council decided not to. So I think there's been a definite emphasis on City Council's perspective of allowing these in some fashion, spread out in a small number throughout the city, but we don't want anything higher than that. So overall, the program is doing very well. Of course, like anything else, we do get some problems and some complaints, but it's really not a major issue. And I do think that the average person out there would be surprised at how many we have in the city that are completely blended in. They just look like a typical house. You might see different people going in and out if you happen to catch them. But other than that, it's pretty well blended into our system. So that's all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff right now, which again, he has a bit of a different perspective on these and a different situation. So I'd be happy to take any questions at the end.
All right. Thanks again, Kyle. I really appreciate your perspective. Here in Waterford Township, Airbnbs have a little bit of a different approach, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. Is short-term rentals in an area where the reason for a short-term rental in Waterford, unlike Ferndale, is the rental is the destination. You're not there to spend the night and do something else. You're there to be on the property. And inherently, when you take that and you couple it in with the lack of density that we have in Waterford compared to Ferndale, it's a significantly different approach. With that being said, short-term rentals in Waterford have always been a thing. Just until recently, they were never called short-term rentals. Waterford inherently for decades, if not centuries, was a culture of waterfront cottages, as you may know. And it's a lot of people who lived in Waterford historically did not live there full time. And as a result, there's always been people who have been renting out these cottages for several weeks at a time to offset the cost of having a second home. This isn't something that is new to Waterford, and it hasn't been something that really was an issue until short-term rentals really became prominent in the last 10 years or so. So much so that in Waterford, it actually wasn't even baked into our rental certification program that we have for long-term rentals. Our definition for a rental in Waterford for registration specifically excluded owner-occupied single-family homes where the owner, through a vacation home exchange program or occasional seasonal rental, vacates the home entirely and permits an exchange or seasonal rental family to occupy the premises of a short-term stay. So this isn't really something that's new to Waterford Township. And additionally, most townships have somewhat of small non-residential uses within their community. For example, based on state legislation, child daycare homes are often used in the residential districts. Adult foster care homes are. Waterford does have a selection of hobby breeders. A lot of our residential properties have chickens, things like that, ducks. And then also, of course, home occupations has been a very big thing with the rise of COVID. And a lot of people have home offices where they bring in clients in meetings at the residential level. Now, short-term rentals used to be somewhere in these groups where it wasn't such a big deal. And then recently what happened? Well, they started marketing these things on the internet, and this became much, much more prominent and a much bigger issue that we've had. So now today's day, short-term rentals aren't simply someone renting out their cottage for a week to offset the cost of their home. They've been defined now as a furnished, self-contained apartment or house that are rented for short periods of time. In Michigan State defines short-term rentals as being less than 30 days. And it looks like Kyle did, and so did I, we modified our definition to include less than 30 days to match state legislation. These are generally looked at as alternatives to hotels. This is something where, some people are looking for a different type of experience. They're looking to be, especially in Waterford, they want to be on the water for a couple days rather than being, in a cramped hotel or something. They've become much, much more popular online as brokerage companies have adapted to advertising them. And this is why we're seeing a huge influx in demand compared to previously. And now this is what short-term rentals in Waterford have become effectively. They are rarely owner occupied. Most often they're owned by a company that owns various short-term rentals that don't live in the community. This isn't something that they don't own the property for the sake of offsetting the cost. They don't have a short-term rental for the sake of offsetting the costs of the property they own. This is an investment now. So no matter how you want to shake this is someone looking to wedge a business into a single-family residential district. Commonly someone who another one we'd have is people who did have a rental long-term and they found that they could have a much higher ROI for a short-term rental than a long-term rental. So if you're charging $2,000 a month for rent, when you could alternatively pick $500 a day, a lot of people are going to pick that all day. So trying to regulate that has become big. Now, there is a lot of pending state legislation. I want to first speak. I'm not an attorney, but I have consulted with our legal department and other attorneys to craft how we've managed this. Because there's such disagreement in state legislation, there's bills ranging all over the place, from completely removing any type of police power from municipal authority to having very strict licensing requirements that involve state regulations as well. So unlike hotels, Airbnbs are currently being unregulated by Laura. So municipalities are left to figure out how are we going to handle these things. And we're not getting a lot of help right now from the state. And we're also worried about litigation. So we have to do something, but doing nothing it's affected Waterford. So we've had to come up with ordinances to work with these. And while Lansing is still trying to figure out what to do with these short-term rentals, they're getting more and more popular every year. And so townships have to figure out a way to deal with these without contradicting any future state legislation that may happen, but also not facing any litigation from short-term rental attorneys. An all-out residential ban historically in Michigan has resulted in Lansing removing any type of municipal authority from that use. House Bill 4722 and Senate Bill 446 propose to remove any type of municipal zoning for short-term rentals. There has been in the past other legislation at the state level where a land use was removed from municipal zoning. Solar panels and wind turbines come to mind right now. A lot of talk from attorneys that we've spoken with is that this is a result of attempts to have an all-out ban in your municipality for short-term rentals. So also short-term rentals can be very easily challenged at the legal level. And this is especially true if, like in Waterford, you had some sort of ordinance or code of ordinance or an interpretation previously that shows that you were okay with short-term rentals. Now, before short-term rentals were a thing, it was baked into Waterford Township's ordinance that we were okay with what a judge would determine is a short-term rental, someone just renting out their cottage for a week. So lawsuits have sprouted throughout the state. And from what we're seeing, judges have been ruling on these in a case-by-case basis, and there isn't a lot of consistency throughout the state on how they're handling short-term rentals. That being said, the Michigan Court of Appeals has found that if there is very firm, stiff ordinances in how to regulate short-term rentals, the judges generally will side with the municipality on that. So far we're finding that zoning regulations appear to be working. And if we're going to be crafting a zoning ordinance on how to regulate these in a way that is safe, we have to find out what are we trying to accomplish here. So first and foremost, when drafting an ordinance amendment for short-term rentals, and this is just what works for us, I think that a lot of low-density townships might benefit from this. Determining what are we looking for first? Well, first and foremost, we need to protect the neighborhood character. These short-term rentals need to not be a burden on the residential community that's already there, that's been existing and thriving for decades, for centuries, for people that this is the biggest investment in their lives is their residential property. And any type of change like that is going to be a sensitive topic. So looking at ensuring that the neighborhood's values and what they look at aesthetically and what they expect in a day-to-day process is not being impacted by these short-term rentals is important. And then also trying to regulate these is a high priority also in terms of volume. I think 5% would be a very high number in Waterford, given how big our lots are and how few properties are on our blocks. But I think trying to control the numbers in the future is a really good idea. Ensuring health and safety and pretty much stop slumlording is really important. A lot of these people are looking for easy money. We're finding people are just, as I said before, they're buying these rentals because they can make more money per day than they ever would as a regular renter. So you're getting kind of we're seeing the lower end of quality for a short-term rental owner. Address housing ability and affordability. We don't want to push out our residents. We don't want to drive up the cost of our residential property values to the point where just people from Los Angeles are purchasing all of our waterfront properties, pushing out anyone that would want to live there long term just to make essentially unregulated hotels. Um, we also need to promote fair competition with our hotel industry. I mean, Waterford has an airport. It's one of the most popular private airports in the country. And as a result, we do have hotels here and there are lodging here. And these ones have to jump through hoops through licensing and regulatory affairs and other state entities. And we don't want to have these types of people looking to open up short-term rentals to undercut the hotel industry. And of course, as I said before, we're trying to avoid litigation. There are existing laws, and it looks like these laws may be changing any day now. Trying to keep up with them is important, and so we want to have clear and transparent regulations to show everyone that is in this process being affected, whether you're someone looking to buy a short-term rental, looking to occupy a short-term rental, or living next to a short-term rental. They need to know the clear and transparent regulations. And then a big thing is enhancing the community's relations with these short-term rentals. We want to have the best short-term rental hosters Waterford can have. And part of that too is that folds into having a good relationship with the community and the neighborhood that that short-term rental is going to be in. And that comes slowly over time through building trust and trying to facilitate an environment where these short-term rentals are there and present in their community is important. So, with all those goals in mind, the first thing that you want to do is draft a very good definition of what you would call a short-term rental. You want to break that out from a regular hotel. You want to break that out from a long-term rental. You want to break that out from a residential property in general. So the definition that we came up with was a dwelling or portion thereof that is used, offered, or made available for the use to occupy the premises or portion thereof on a short-term stay less than 30 days. This definition does not include hotels and motels as defined by the Township Zoning Ordinance and licensed inspected by the state of Michigan. So one thing I really do want to highlight here is to use a portion thereof or something to that effect, because not all short-term rentals, especially what we're seeing in Waterford, are just offering the whole single dwelling. There's apps like Swimply and Boat Setter where people are renting, say, just the backyard or a pool or the lakefront for a day or two, or someone has, say, a boathouse in the back of their property where they're renting it out. So one could easily make a legal argument that I'm not a short-term rental just because I'm renting out my pool for a day, or just because I'm renting out my boat garage for a week. So make sure to, I really recommend you having it say a portion thereof, or some other term that says that it's not the whole dwelling. It doesn't have to be the whole dwelling. Now, we established a short-term rental registration program. This one is similar to Kyle's. It just pretty much, it requires communication and upkeep with the existing short-term rentals. We kind of just took our existing long-term rental program and pieced it out as just a short-term rental program. It's important to have initial registration fees, annual updating fees for all of our inspectors that go out there on the site. We've got plumbing inspectors, electrical inspectors, code enforcement officers, building officials that each view these properties. And then, I mean, with short-term rentals, especially with the rash that the state is feeling within the last 5 years or so, a non-compliance fine is pretty important. There are a lot of people, as Kyle mentioned, who are going to buy a short-term rental first, find out that what they did was legal, and just keep it anyway. So set a regular reinspection interval for your registration program. 1 to 4 years. I don't recommend going any more than 4 years. It's based on your staffing availability. I recognize that if you're in a small township in northern Michigan, you can't feasibly do for once every year or biannually, and you're resorting to 3 or 4 years. I do recommend in our ordinance, we grant the inspection staff the ability to increase it. So let's say you have a problem child on your second year, you can set their certification to having an annual review next year rather than going the full 3 or 4 years. Um, Additionally, allow the short-term rental users to inspect anyway. I mean, these Airbnb business models are so reliant on 5-star reviews. And as a result, the tenants of a short-term rental realize the power that they wield with that. And sometimes they've reached out to the township and said that we have a problem with our short-term rental and we want to see what we can do about it at the municipal level. And that would definitely kick up an inspection or go even further from there, could result in a removal of the short-term rental. I recommend that you have the registration program go into your code of ordinances rather than your zoning ordinance, because if it was to go in your zoning ordinance, you will, and I'm sure you do, have legal non-conforming short-term rentals that existed prior to any ordinance that you're drafting. If it's in the code of ordinance, you no longer have to worry about grandfathering the property, and they have to continue to go through that registration. Now, all short-term rentals in Waterford Township prior to post our new law require going to the planning commission. So the planning commission has the definitive approval on these. And this is pretty nifty with our registration program now. So let's say we have a grandfathered legal non-conforming short-term rental that didn't go to the planning commission. Well, once their registration is up, they then, because it's in the code, they're then required and uncapped as a short-term rental and have to go to the planning commission. So this is a good way to get rid of a lot of short-term rentals that might have existed prior to any ordinances you have. We also like the special approval process because it facilitates interaction with the community. It makes sure to notify people that this is in their backyard. This is something that is going to be affecting them, and they can comment on it. We have an established review criteria. There is a test that the planning commission looks at whenever they approve or deny any short-term rental, and it's a very standard 6-point criteria. When we do a short-term rental, we have the Department of Public Works, Police, Fire review these proposals. And one of the big things, unlike most other special approvals we have, is we don't lump in the police department. Here we do, so that we can get a history on the property for any, say, prior issues that the renter has had. Could it be a previously owned rental, or was it an illegal short-term rental that is now going forward? So this is a good way to loop in the police department right away. We have a standard approval criteria to ensure orderly development, to make sure that there's a consistent standard on how these things look, and that's pretty important should there be a denial and it gets legally challenged. That being said, you still need to have protections in place should one get approved and something bad happen, which is why I think the rental registration is really important. And then also we have a list of standards and conditions that we put as a blanket for almost any type of approved special approval. Now, generally with any special approval that the planning commission gets for a short-term rental, they bake in these conditions right away. The planning commission reserves the right to modify or revoke this special approval following complaints, safety concerns, or site plan violations. Now, this is really important. Should a neighborhood be in favor of a short-term rental that's in their area and then suddenly be against it for, say, a specific issue that happened, or the landlord suddenly dropped off and isn't as cooperative as they used to be, there's just not a lot of dialogue with the community, they can then bring this to us, and the planning commission has the authority to revoke that approval. That hasn't happened yet, but it's always something that could potentially happen, and it lights a fire in the butt of these short-term rental owners. The subject property must continue to be owned by the applicant. I mean, a lot of us are planners. A lot of us know that sometimes the money is in the approval. People will buy properties, rezone them, or get a special approval for something and then sell it as a turnkey investment to someone else. So the second someone sells that property, they lose the authority to have that be a short-term rental again, and they have to start the whole process all over. It's one big thing, because these are waterfront properties for the most part, there's a blanket condition where renters are not provided access to or the option to bring their own motorized watercraft. We've been fine with kayaks. We haven't had any issues with pedal boats or paddle boards or anything like that. But I mean, a lot of these lakes, especially Waterford, has 34 named lakes. Each one has their own code of conduct for how to operate a boat in their lakes. Uh, the counterclockwise things, there's certain rights of way regulations that are beyond just, what is standard boater safety requirements. So it's important to not allow any type of renter the ability to bring their own motorized watercraft and pretty much tear it up in the lake and cause a safety concern. Renters of the property shall not have parties or gatherings. That's in that flyer I previously showed. That's a big thing we're having is someone will form a blind pig. They will rent out a lake house for a day. They'll do the, guys pay $50, girls get in free, live music. It's a giant party. It's a bar. They found a way to open up a bar in the township. So as a result, we do a blanket, no parties, no massive gatherings. All renters' cars must be parked in the driveway. If you do not have the driveway capacity to take in the tenant, you do not get to take in that tenant. Waterford does not have a lot of sidewalks. Our right-of-ways are very narrow because of our lakefronts. So being able to park off-street can be a huge burden in the residential community. So that's a huge thing. We've had Airbnb hopefuls look at expanding their driveway to accommodate something because they only had one parking spot. Excessive noise, we put a blanket between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. That currently hasn't been a problem. That's generally what I find with most neighbors who live in the area anyway. And then also, since these are looked at by the Planning Commission on a case-by-case basis, we sometimes have seen interesting conditions that have been imposed based on the specific situation. For example, we had an applicant who pretty much just had a previous use of a short-term rental, the way we would talk about it traditionally before Airbnbs were a thing, where they would just rent out their property for a week or so just to offset the costs of their property. And they would rely on word of mouth and didn't want to be vetting any type of, Airbnb renter. So the Planning Commission said, that's fine. What if we just baked that into the condition and you can only rely on word of mouth and you can't use online brokerage companies to advertise your property? We had another one where it was two homes. The resident owned one property and the neighboring property wanted to rent out the other one as a short-term rental. And the logic that the Planning Commission had was, well, you're going to want the best short-term rental tenants you can have because you're literally right there. And there's no interest like self-interest. So you're obviously going to be finding the best tenants and you're going to be present. What if they conditioned the short-term rental based on you perpetually living next to this short-term rental? And the second, if you were ever to sell your principal dwelling, you lose the authority to have that be a short-term rental. And then another one we had where someone said they're only looking to rent it 6 times a year. Planning Commission said, fine, let's bake that into the special approval as well. So you can, when you get to the special approval, and all of these neighborhoods are so very different and you can't regulate a blanket ordinance, I think this is a very important thing to look at. Now, when you do have something like this, it's important to remember to prepare for a big time developer to try and out money you. There's someone you're gonna get I live in Florida, I'm buying 20 houses in 3 townships, and they're all gonna be short-term rentals, and I'm just gonna sue any denial I have. It's important that the Planning Commission already act that way as if they're already been sued. Make sure that they discuss anything in their criteria for why they would review a short-term rental out loud to make sure that all of the discussion has been out there for the public, and make sure your minutes are good with the assumption that a judge is going to one day be reading this and ensure that there's no stone unturned with the approval or denial process. Have the Planning Commission vocalize everything. Is this specific property compatible with adjacent uses? Has it been a strain on the public services? Does it fulfill a gap coverage and such things? Is there a short-term rental nearby already? These are important things for them to look at and make sure they vocalize this out loud for a judge to review. Now, I'm going to go through 2 case studies, one a short-term rental that the township approved and one that the Planning Commission denied. So case study number 1 was a short-term rental that we had where it's a sweet a woman who grew up in this property. They've owned it since 1979. Since that time, she's moved to the West Coast. She got married, she raised a family, and her parents passed away, and she could not bring it upon herself to sell her childhood home, and she wanted to continue to keep it as a vacation house for her family. This woman had an incredible relationship with the neighboring community. She grew up with these people, and it was actually hard. It was so sweet to see the entire neighborhood show up in support of this property turning into a short-term rental with the logic of, we grew up with this person is our family, and if the only way to keep her in Michigan sometimes is to have this be a short-term rental, then so be it. We want this to be here. We're gonna these neighbors agreed to keep an eye on the property, and one did agree to be listed as the responsible local agent, which is something that I skipped over before that I shouldn't have. Part of our registration requirement requires having a responsible local agent be assigned to the property who has to live in Michigan and be available 24 hours a day should something bad happen. This is also pretty typical for a regular landlord for a long-term rental in Waterford. So we had a neighbor sign on as the local agent who is responsible for anything that goes on in this neighborhood. The planning commission unanimously approved it, given they listed some of these conditions. They listed all of these conditions here, a lot of them are the blanket ones that we discussed, reserving the right to revoke or modify should something bad happen down the line. The property cannot be made available to no more than 8 people at a time, quiet hours 10 to 8, no parties as we discussed before. The property shall not be rented for periods of less than 3 nights, and those get lumped in there too to reduce any possibility of parties. You can't just rent it out for one night and then leave when the cops show up. You have to be there for a couple days. The no watercrafts, and they should revoke the special approval gets revoked should this woman ever decide to sell her property and leave the community. Case study for a denial. Very opposite story. This was a property that was purchased by someone from San Francisco with the intent of renting it as a short-term rental. The planning commission criteria that we had gives them the authority, gives the applicant the ability to present a case as to why it is you should get a short-term rental. What do you intend to do to make this not be a burden on the community? This person said that they're going to make parties not be allowed. They didn't show how they intended to satisfy that requirement, just make that a blanket regulation. During the special approval staff report write-up, when we contacted the police department, we actually found that there was, in fact, not only has this property already been listed as an Airbnb, but the sheriff's office has, this isn't the exact flyer for protection. This is a different one that I found on the west side of the country, but we found something like this with the address listed for this short-term rental for a party the next week. So this person, before even getting their special approval, has already been advertising it as a short-term rental and has already done a horrible job at reducing exactly what this is. It's no surprise to no one that they got a denial. So future steps with our ordinance that has been working so far. How do we make this continue to keep this program? Well, one, don't let this be a low risk, high reward thing. So many short-term rental applicants that we see they're looking at this as easy money. This is something where, why would I make $2,000 a month when I can make $500 a day? I require them to have buy-in. A detailed program, as I said before, really does help you out. If you can lay down all of your processes to a judge to say, this is how from start to finish a short-term rental gets done in our community. This person didn't do half of these things, is really going to help you out with your situation. And then one of the big things that we're finding is that every situation with a short-term rental is different. And that's not surprising because every neighborhood is different. There's some neighborhoods that you will find that welcome a short-term rental. I've seen stories where people have had a short-term rental in their neighborhood for 2 decades before Airbnbs were even a thing, and they liked it because it was a fun way to meet different and interesting people from all over the country. Some people, it's a way to keep your property that you grew up with. Some people, if they could, they would build a wall around their lake and not let the public even look at it. So it depends in every different neighborhood what could happen. It's important that short-term rentals are long-term maintenance is continuation. So the registration process is key. You can't simply just allow an approval and allow for the planning commission to revoke an approval should there be a complaint. You still need to have boots on the ground all the time to make sure that our code enforcement and our building officials are out there to make sure that this property is still maintained. The protections still need to be in place should anything happen. So any short-term rental that gets approved can be revoked, and you need to give that protection to the neighborhood. And we're finding what's most important is that public participation is key. Every planning commission approval that we've seen so far for a short-term rental has received buy-in from the immediate neighborhood. And this has been interesting because it facilitates an environment where the owner of the short-term rental has to be there. They have to be in the community. They have to be speaking to these people. And we tell them right out of the gate, if you intend to be a short-term renter, you're going to have to get to know your neighbors. You're not going to get away with this just being a regular, just, money in the bank business model. At this time, all of our short-term rentals that are legally approved have zero code enforcement complaints. We've actually yet to receive a single issue we don't have a lot. I mean, Waterford only has several, but from the few that we have, we've yet to receive a single code enforcement complaint. And it's important to make sure that everyone knows that you have this short-term rental because you have community support. And should you lose that support, the planning commission has the authority to take it away from you. Future steps. Honestly, rip off some of what Ferndale is doing. I really did appreciate the Ferndale presentation. I think capping a percentage of the housing stock is a really interesting idea. I don't think Waterford would entertain one based on a block. I think a blanket township-wide housing stock cap would probably be a great idea. I also do like the idea of having a limit on guests per room. Waterford at this time currently doesn't have that, and that's something that I think exploring would be really great to reduce even further the possibility of having these lakefront parties. Education is important. Speaking to the community about the ordinances that are in place, letting people know that we are doing something to address these issues. And I mean, presentations like this are always very helpful. And it's important with any ordinance amendment or any change, especially at the residential level, you have to trust the results. I'm currently hearing a lot of residents that are upset about short-term rentals getting established, and the question I ask them is your quality of life currently being affected by one? No. Well, is there one being proposed near you? No. Was there one in the past that was denied? Yes. Well, it sounds like the ordinance is working. The only areas that we've had a short-term rental be approved is one that has the community support. And some people are still distrustful of that. And I think the only way to solve that is just over time to show them that we found a way to avoid litigation. We found a way to regulate these things, and we found a way to stop being a burden on your quality of life. Prioritizing enforcement is important. We are still going to have, no matter what ordinance you write, you're going to have illegal short-term rentals, just like almost any other land use. Swiftly dealing with them is really, really important so that people see that immediately the community is doing something with these short-term rentals. Showing that enforcement is present all the time is very, very important. And addressing legal non-conforming short-term rentals, because these are the ones that have managed to get in before we had any ordinance amendment. As their certifications expire, finding ways to get them to have their day in front of the planning commission is key. Or even if they can still, you can legally make an argument if they are registered. However, there have been significant code enforcement complaints. We can make an argument that they have to go to the planning commission early anyway. We haven't been in that situation yet because I think our short-term rental owners know they have to be on their best behavior. But should that ever happen, we do have that ability. Thank you. That is the end of my short-term rental from the township perspective.
All right, excellent job, Kyle and Jeff. Thank you very much. We do have a number of questions. We'll get to them pronto here. First up, what happens when someone is operating a short-term rental without a permit? There's a few in our village, mostly investors, and they are renting day, weekend, and week. Can the village shut them down?
I can answer that first. Yes. I mean, it's the reason why though is because we have an ordinance in place. If you have nothing defining a short-term rental, then your short-term rental is pretty much subject to the same thing as your long-term rental, especially when it comes to the Fair Housing Act, where you can't have a discrimination of housing be someone who lives there for a year, 6 months, 30 days, 10 days. So unless you break it out as an ordinance, you don't have an enforcement ability. So we are able to take that and issue a cease and desist, a stop work order, and take it to our district court judge should there be any issues, because it would be a code enforcement violation and a zoning violation. And the judge has sided with us every time on that.
Okay. Kyle,
Yeah,
anything to add?
I would say for us, it's a little bit different in that we have, quite a bit less, I guess, approval methods, but it's just like he said, you have to have the ordinance and you have to have the provisions within the ordinance to allow you to enforce it. So we do have some ways to clamp down on people. I mean, we have tickets and things like that. Ultimately, we would prefer that they comply where it's possible for us. But yeah, you would have to develop an ordinance that allows you to execute what you need to do to control your community.
Okay. Next question is the density block caps, the number of people and the number of days an aerial, all allowable for local units of government to regulate. Can you speak to what gives us this legal authority?
That I am not very familiar with. I think our city attorney handled that. And frankly, I wasn't here when we even put this stuff together. So this was set up about a year before I got here. So I would just consult with your legal attorney, but I believe you definitely have the flexibility to control these sorts of density provisions.
Okay. Just an open question. Will these slides be available at the link provided? We do provide the video. Kyle, Jeff, do you have any concerns about us also posting your slides?
No, I don't.
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the answer to that was yes, they will be available.
Just email me if you want my slides. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Okay. Next question is Ferndale asking for or collecting any self-reported feedback from STR owners on the occupancy rates or success of the STRs in the city?
No, we're not at this time. I mean, that's something we've talked about doing, but we have not implemented it. I would say most STR operators do seem to be continuing year after year. So to me, that is evidence that they are doing well. And combined with my lack of getting concerns about it, that's sort of where I've come to the conclusion that it is working well. People do drop out for various reasons. Sometimes it's just they're selling the property. They don't want to deal with it anymore. I don't know if it's ever related to it not being as lucrative as they thought it was going to be, but periodically we do get people who drop out. But from what I've seen, it's almost like an incumbent politician. Like once they have that spot, people seem reluctant to give it up.
Okay. Jeff, are you doing anything of that sort?
I'm sorry, I had a quick phone call. What was the question?
Are you asking for or collecting any self-reported feedback from owners on these facilities regarding occupancy rates or their general success?
I have not, but that's probably a really good idea.
Okay.
I mean, currently in Waterford, we only have 3 approved short-term rentals. So I
Okay.
don't know if we have enough of a data source for something like that. But I do think that it's a great idea.
Okay. I think this has already been answered from your previous question, but how do you enforce situations where renters don't follow the process and simply rent their properties through Airbnb, VRBO, or word of mouth?
So for us, cease and desist, stop work order, court, and it's been working. The only issue that I am facing this is that I can't control the Airbnb website. And they host, they put whatever they want, and that's probably one of the biggest issues that we're having. I will say one of the House bills currently online, it's currently getting looked at right now, does have the state step in to go after Airbnb should they continue to host properties that aren't receiving municipal approval. So if that bill does go forward, we don't have the attorney power to go after Airbnb, but the state does. So I think that would be very helpful to regulating what goes online.
Okay. Can a short-term rental be adjacent to a public school?
For us, yes, it could be.
In
It's really no
Waterford,
different than any kind of rental.
Yeah. Okay.
in Waterford, that is also possible. That's actually a really interesting point. It has never been a problem, and I think for the most part because there aren't any schools right next to lakes. But I do think that does invite an interesting conversation.
Okay. Regarding Waterford, have not heard any mention of the difference between public and private lakes. There's concern about water safety. It's nice to say that renters cannot bring their own boats, But who will enforce that? Who could enforce that? Law enforcement is not on our lake.
Well, I mean, when it comes to the public and private lake conversation, you have that problem regardless of short-term rentals or not. Your neighbor's friend who just had 10 beers and is going to take your jet ski out without anyone knowing about it is a problem that we've seen on all of these lakes. And frankly, our short-term rentals that we've had are on their best behavior compared to any of our long-term rentals or property owners when it comes to any of these police issues. Furthermore, there legally is no differentiation between a private lake and a public lake in the township. All of these lakes are owned by the DNR. There's private access and public access lakes both in the area, but generally what we're seeing is all the safety concerns we've ever seen from lakes come from property owners.
Okay, that is it for questions, and we are at 11 o'clock. So Ryan, you want to?
Really just wanted to thank Kyle and Jeff for joining us today and providing their insight and experiences. Also want to thank everyone else that attended, and I look forward to seeing you at our next scheduled planners gathering on November 19th. We'll have a presentation from Neighborhood and Housing Development Division staff, and they'll provide an overview of the services and funding opportunities offered to communities through the Oakland Together Housing Trust Fund. So again, thanks for joining us today, everyone. Have a wonderful day.